Chapter 23. The Leviathan. Darren waited for the strange Swiss boy to shake her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he finally reached out. "My name is Alec," he said. "Pleased to meet you." Darren smiled. Though her head was aching, the boy was about her age, with reddish-brown hair and sharp, handsome features. His leather coat had once been posh, but it was threadbare now. A twitchiness animated the boy's dark green eyes, as if he were ready to bound away on his ridiculous shoes. All very odd, Darren thought. "Are you sure you're quite all right?" Alec asked. His English was dead proper, even with the clanker accent. "Right enough," Darren said. She stamped, feeling back into her feet, wondering when the dizziness was going to go away. Her attic had been scrambled, that was certain. She couldn't recall the exact moment of the crash, only the descent, the snow rising up, the airship rolling over, threatening to crush her if she didn't climb fast enough. Darren glanced down at her safety line. It was stretched and frayed, but still attached at the ratlines. She must have been dragged along as the Airbee skidded across the snow. If the ship had rolled over any farther, she'd had wound up a greasy squick beneath the whale. "A wee bit dizzy is all," she added, looking up at the bullet-holed membrane. The bitter almond smell of leaking hydrogen filled her muzzy head. "Not half as bad as this beastie here." "Yes, your ship looks terrible," Alex said. His eyes were wide, like he'd never seen a fabricated creature before. Maybe that explained his twitchiness. "Do you think you can fix it?" Darren stepped back for a better view of the wreck. Hardly anyone was working here on the starboard flank, but up on the spine men were silhouetting against the searchlight beams reaching into the sky. The gondolas must have wound up on the other side of the wreck, so the repair work had started over there. Darren knew she should be helping them and finding out what had happened to Newkirk and Mr. Rigsby. But her hands felt so weak to climb. The cold had seeped into her bones while she'd laid unconscious. Eventually her eyes scanned the bleak terrain. "But I wouldn't fancy staying very long. But I wouldn't fancy staying here very long. Maybe your people could help us?" The boy's wide eyes widened a bit. "My village is quite far from here, and we don't know anything about airships." "No, of course not. But this looks like a big job. We'll need lots of rope, maybe machine parts. The engines on this side must be smashed to blazes. You Swiss are good with gears, aren't you?" "I'm afraid we can't help." Alec pulled a bunch of leather satchels from his shoulder. "But I can give you these for your wounded men." He handed the satchel to Darren. She opened one and peered inside. Bandages, scissors, a thermometer in a leather case, and a dozen of tiny bottles. Whoever Alec's people were, they knew how to get proper supplies up the mountain. "Thank you," she said. "But where did you get these?" "I'm afraid I have to go." The boy took a step backward. "I'm expected home soon." "Wait, Alec," she cried, making him jump. Living up here, he probably wasn't used to strangers, but she couldn't let him wiggle away just like this. "Just tell me where your village is." the other side of the glacier. He made a gesture toward the horizon, in no particular direction, quite far away. Darren wondered if he was hiding something. Of course, to live in a shivery wasteland like this, you'd have to be a bit cracked in the attic. Or were his people outlaws of some kind? Seems like an odd place to have a village, she said carefully. Well, it's not what you'd call a large village. Just me and my extended family. Darren nodded slowly, still smiling, as so Alec was changing his story now. Was there a village or wasn't there? He took another step backward. Listen, I'm not really supposed to be this far from home. I just happened to be out hiking and I saw your ship come down. Out hiking? Darren said. In all this barking snow? At night? Yes, I often hike on the glacier at night. With medicine? Alec blinked. Well, that was because... There was a long pause. I'm afraid I don't know the word in English. The word for what? I just said I don't know it. He turned from her and began to slide away on his funny oversized shoes. I have to go now. Alec's story was clearly a load of blether. And wherever he was from, the ship's officers would want to know about it. She stared. She started to follow him, but her foot cracked through the brittle surface, filling her boot with snow. Blisters, she swore, suddenly seeing the point of his big, slidey shoes. Don't go skidding off, Alex. We need you. The boy came to a reluctant halt. Listen, I'll bring you whatever I can, all right? But you can't tell anyone you saw me. If you come looking for my family, it won't be good. We don't like strangers, and we can be quite dangerous. Dangerous? Darren asked. They had to be outlaws, or worse. She put a hand into her pocket, feeling for her command whistle. Very deadly, Alex said. So you have to promise not to tell anyone about me, all right? He stood there, his green eyes locked with hers. Darren held her breath, trying to match the intensity of his gaze, like a stare-off before a fistfight. It made her stomach flutter. Do you promise? He demanded again. I can't let you go, Alec, she said softly. You what? I have to report you to the ship's officers. They'll want to ask you a few questions. His eyes widened. You're going to interrogate me? I'm sorry, Alec, but if there's dangerous folks about, it's my duty to tell the officers. She held up the satchels. You're smugglers or something, aren't you? Smugglers? Don't be absurd, Alex said. We're perfectly decent people. If you're so decent, Darren said, then why have you been telling me a lot of yakkum? I was just trying to help, and I don't know what yakkum is, the boy sputtered, then said something unpleasant in German. He turned around in his giant shoes and headed off into the darkness. Darren pulled the command whistle from her pocket. The freezing metal burned her lips as she piped a quick sequence of notes of an intruder alert ringing in the cold air. She stuffed the whistle back in her pocket and trudged after him ignoring the snow collecting in her boots. "Hold up, Alec! No one's going to hurt you." He didn't answer, just kept sliding away. But Darren heard shouts behind her and the scramble of hydrogen sniffers on the rat lines. The beasties jumped like rabbits on fire when you blew an intruder alert. "Alec, stop! I just want to talk." The boy glanced over his shoulder, and his eyes went wide at the sight of the sniffers. He uttered a panicked cry and slowed to a halt, turning to face her again. Darren ran harder, hoping to get there before the sniffers did. No point in letting the beasties scare poor Alec to death. "Just wait there," she called. "There's no reason to." Her voice trailed off as she saw what was in Alec's hand, a black pistol, a metal gleaming in the moonlight. "Are you daft?" she cried, breathing in a bitter smell of hydrogen. One spark from the gunshot could ignite the air, turning the ship into a vast fireball. "Don't come any closer," Alex said, "and call those things off." Darren came to a halt, glancing at the sniffers bounding toward them across the snow. I would, but I don't think they'll listen." The pistol swerved from her to the sniffers, and she saw Alec's jaw tense. "Don't," she cried. You'll set us all aflame." But he was raising his arm, aiming at the nearest beastie. Darren threw herself forward, smothering the gun with her body. The bullet was nothing compared to catching fire. She grabbed Alec's shoulder and dragged him down into the snow. Her head went through the brittle ice with a crack, sending stars across her vision. Alec landed on top of her, the barrel of the gun jabbing hard against her ribs. She closed her eyes, waiting for an explosion of agony and noise. He was struggling to free the pistol, so she pulled him harder against her. The ice cut her cheek as their struggle dug them deeper into the snow. "Let me go," he cried. Darren opened her eyes, glaring straight into his. He froze for a moment, and she spoke in a slow, clear voice. "Don't shoot. The air's full of hydrogen." "I'm not trying to shoot anyone. I'm trying to get away." He started struggling again, the pistol jamming harder into her ribs. Darren let out an oof. She grabbed a hand around the gun, trying to push the barrel aside. A low growl rolling across the snow, and a sniffer thrust its long snout right into Alec's face. He froze again, a look of horror draining the color from his skin. Suddenly the animals were all around him, their hot breath steaming. "It's okay, beasties," Darren said in a calm voice. "Just back off a wee bit, please. You're scaring our friend here, and we don't want him pulling the barking trigger." The nearest sniffer cocked his head, letting out a low whine. Darren heard shouts, crewmen calling off the beasties. Green shadows from the worm lamps swung around them. Alec let out a sigh, his muscles going limp. "Let go of the gun," she said. "Please?" "I can't," he said. "You're squeezing my fingers."